to Iran. In 1979, an Islamic revolution toppled the U.S.-backed Shah, and more than 60 Americans were taken hostage for 444 days. It was downhill from there, Iranians engaging in ritualistic death to America chants, President George W. Bush calling Iran part of the axis of evil. But relations have improved somewhat following protracted nuclear negotiations and subsequent lifting of sanctions. Americans can once again travel to Iran. Among them, two of our colleagues who recently returned from a trip to its capital, Tehran. Marco Werman, host of PRI's Great the World, in partnership with GVH. Marco, it's good to see you.
Hey.
Matthew Bella, reporter and producer for The World. How hard was it to get in?
It wasn't easy. I mean, I tried in vain a few years ago to get a visa. Didn't really work out. I kind of made a half-hearted attempt. Didn't try again. But we had one of our producers really just stay on the case for several months, and it worked out. We got visas. And I think there seemed to be a trend recently of American journalists getting visas more so than in the past.
Speaking of journalists, how were American journalists treated? We know what happened to the Washington Post report, was just recently released. How were you treated? Did you have someone who monitored your presence? What was it like, Matthew?
Well, we had an official minder who was with a fixed...
Minder is the word?
A fixed... Well, I think it's important to sort of to use that word in a way because this is an official government agency that gave us permission to be in the country. They didn't specifically tell us you have to be with this person all the time, but this was the person with the letter that we had to present in certain situations when people would ask, who are you, or, do you have permission to be here? So she would present the letter, and then it was very clear that
she was like a facilitator.
She was also a translator.
And a translator.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Were there any places you couldn't go? People you couldn't talk to? Things you couldn't do?
I think we had an understanding that reporting on sensitive issues about the clerics or about controversial political things, we might run into some pushback on the ground, and that we kind of heard from talking to other reporters that, if you do something that really annoys the government, they're not going to give you permission to come back.
How about the people? I mean, the majority of the population is under 35, so they didn't live through this revolution in 1979. What are they like? What do they live like?
Well, it's funny. I mean, two different scenes. The first scene at the February 11th rally and celebrating the anniversary of the revolution, a lot of people came there and they kind of wheel out these stock phrases, death to America, death to Israel. In that bulge between 18 and 35, and then you start talking with them, they say, oh, you're from the United States? Oh, we love America.
Same people who were chanting death to...
And then they go straight back to chanting death to
Does that
America.
not make you nervous beyond how weird it is?
Not really, because it was a government kind of controlled event. And so the government's not going to let something like that get out of hand.
Did they feel free to talk to you about politics? Either American politics, Iranian politics, or was that subject sort of off limits?
People love to talk about politics.
Really?
And a couple people told us, everyone in this country is an expert. That's the great thing about politics. And there were, though, a couple times where we sort of showed up, like in the bazaar. We went to just kind of do man-on-the-street interviews. And there was one or two people in particular that were kind of didn't expect us to be there. Oh, my gosh, foreign reporters. The letter came out, and it was like, you could tell they were careful about what they were saying when we did ask them about Iranian politics.
Who wrote the Michael Jackson story? You?
Yeah.
Could you tell that story quickly?
A woman I met, we were talking with, and she was saying, I remember when Michael Jackson died in 2009. This was 2 weeks after, not even 2 weeks, it was about 10 days after the contested elections in Iran. People dying in the street.
Michael Jackson's death was.
Michael Jackson's death. So preceded 10 days earlier by contested elections in Iran. Neda Sultan, the 20-something woman who was killed in the streets, other deaths as well. And this woman told me that when Michael Jackson died, she was crying, and her mother said, you're really upset by these student deaths, aren't you? She said, I am really moved, but I'm actually really moved by Michael Jackson's death because it means he'll never be able to play in Iran. And she really honestly had hoped in her lifetime she'd see Michael Jackson.
So how westernized are these people? How westernized is Tehran, for example?
I have to admit that, Tehran is a lot more cosmopolitan than I thought it would be. Just going to the cinema, for example, we went to the so-called Death to America rally one day. The next day we're in the cinema, we're watching this film, and we're looking at each other like, this film in particular was a love letter to Hollywood classics. And we talked to the director and some actors afterwards and said, this is blowing our minds. We're at the Death to America rally, and now we're watching this film, and they said, welcome to the land of contrasts.
Or on the north side of Tehran, which is a pretty affluent part of the city, I passed by this building, and there's a Ralph Lauren polo store on the ground floor. And I asked, someone, how's this possible in a country that's had, these sanctions? How could, Ralph Lauren even get here? Well, it's a fake storefront, but the owner flies to Dubai to buy authentic Ralph Lauren apparel, brings it back and sells it for
Speaking of that, I know you
markups.
weren't there pre-sanction, but were you able to discern from your conversations with people what pre-sanction or during sanction and post-sanction Iran is like, what the difference is?
This was a big question that we asked a lot of people, in particular some young entrepreneurs that we talked to, and some were quite optimistic. They're really hoping that President Rouhani, who they see as a reformist, who wants to reach out to the rest of the world, will sort of start to lay the groundwork for Iran to be integrated into the global economy. But I think start is the word. On the other hand, we talked to people who were pessimistic, and they said, look, we talked to the one woman in the bazaar who gave the government the hardliners line and said, this is a bad deal. The foreigners are going to come and they're going to take our resources.
Yeah. Speaking of bad deal, we talked about them talking about politics, their politics. How aware are they of our politics? For example, that a Republican stands up at a debate and says, the second I'm sworn in, I will rip up that deal with Iran. Do they know about that?
They do know about that.
They do?
A lot of strong words for Donald Trump, like people asking us, is he really going to get elected? You got to tell this story.
I mean, several different people brought up Donald Trump without us prompting and said, basically, what's the deal with Donald Trump? And we said, well, isn't he entertaining? And don't worry, he won't be elected president. And then they said, yeah, that's what we said about Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
That's a great line. I only have a minute left. Give me your primary takeaway, Marco, from this trip.
My primary takeaway is that Iran, it seems, has always organized itself in relation to how the outside world treats it, going all the way back to Alexander the Great invading, in 300 BC. And I think they're in another phase of trying to reorder itself with, the clerics for like 37 years there, and now this young generation that wasn't there for the revolution and is seeing the world partly through the internet in a very different way.
Quickly, yours.
I think there's a long way to go. It's interesting that this nuclear deal does sort of give the possibility of something different, but for now, it's just really early days. And I think both sides, there's a lot of mistrust. There's a lot of mistrust in Washington. We hear about it all the time. There's a lot of mistrust in Iran.
But it's very exciting. I want to go back.
Thanks a lot. Marco, it was great. Great to see you both, Matthew.
Great pleasure.
Thanks for your work. Thanks for coming by.